Hi. I'm Maddie Bucksbaum-Adamson. I'm the chair of the Education, Advocacy, and Outreach Committee at the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York. At the foundation, girls and women are our mission and our passion. Our vision is a world in which females are empowered to fully pursue their dreams. And our goal is not just to change and transform their lives today, but to change their world. We are privileged to co-sponsor tonight's event with Upstart, an organization which describes its mission as, quote, inspiring and empowering leaders to dream, build, and grow bold initiatives that enhance the vitality of Jewish life. So, on behalf of the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York and Upstart, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight for a very special evening. Great, I love applause. So, on a serious note, how do we fix our broken world? Mother Teresa said, "If I look at the mass, I will never act. If I look at the one, I will." We are here today to celebrate women who have seen one problem, one issue, and have acted. Jewish women who have the values, insight, courage, grit, determination, and, courage, to devote their lives, their energy, and their resources to changing the world one issue at a time. The world calls them social entrepreneurs, the definition of which is, and I'll read, one who works to permanently and systematically transform a societal condition, creating a product, service, or methodology that spurs the transformation of the status quo. I call these women pure inspiration and hope for a better world. They are perfect examples of the seeds of change taking root all over the world, addressing many of the underlying causes of today's global instability, including lack of education, lack of access to medical, especially maternal care, abuse, poverty, hunger, and so much more. We are very proud to say that the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York has been at the forefront of promoting and funding this kind of work. We support Jewish female social entrepreneurs who have founded and lead organizations that address many of the issues that we'll talk about tonight. In addition, things like clean water in Africa, hygiene education in India, and women's empowerment, just to name a few. And I've personally found that the women entrepreneurs that I've met through our funding efforts are some of the most inspirational people that I've ever met. And I think you'll see that tonight. We hope you'll be excited and touched by their work. And we hope that you might even be motivated to take part going forward as a funder, a volunteer, an activist, or maybe even a social entrepreneur yourself. And it's not too late to join the Jewish Women's Foundation's new Giving Circle, supporting women doing this kind of work in the United States. So if you're interested in getting more information, please find one of our professionals, another foundation member, or me after the event, and I'm really happy to tell you more than you need to know about it. So now we have the privilege of hearing and talking to some of these wonderful women tonight, hearing their personal stories about how they've taken the path that they've taken and started their new ventures. So we'll start with our panel speakers, and then we'll open it up to your questions, and then have more intimate conversations at your tables with the social entrepreneurs who are seated among us. I'd like you to take a moment to look at your program. You'll see that it has resources and contact information for the organizations that you'll hear about tonight, including the Jewish Women's Foundation and Upstart. So now, it is my pleasure to introduce our introductory speaker, Rabbi Yafa Epstein, who is a graduate of Yeshivat Maharat, an organization established by social entrepreneur Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz. And we're very proud to say that both Upstart Network and the Jewish Women's Foundation has supported the organization. Rabbi Yaffa is the Director of Education at the Pardes Institute of Jewish Studies. Her complete bio can be found in your program. So without further ado, I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good evening. I want to begin by thanking the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, its board and professional leadership, as well as Upstart and its leadership, for hosting us this evening and for all of the amazing work that you do. It is truly an honor to be here with all of you and to have a chance to learn from these incredible inspirational women who are such role models to all of us. Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, in her groundbreaking book, Lean In, has some advice for people in the workplace. Show up authentically. In her words, true leadership stems from individuality that is honestly and sometimes imperfectly expressed. Leaders should strive for authenticity over perfection. Sheryl Sandberg is teaching us that who we are in all of our power and in all of our imperfection is what will make us authentic and real leaders. When we look at the Torah, we see a similar message. Each of our forefathers and foremothers, the heroes and heroines of our tradition, had an impact at the national level, specifically through their personal stories. It is because of those human stories, those imperfections, those struggles, that they are our heroes and our role models. The Torah truly understands that the personal is political and that the individual's journey has epic and historic consequences for the entire Jewish people. The holiday of Purim, which we are about to celebrate in just 1 month, teaches us this lesson expressly. Here, we have the character of Esther, whose personal choices are what save the entire Jewish people. The rabbis create a holiday, indeed the first rabbinic holiday to be created is in order to commemorate Queen Esther's trust in God and her immense bravery. Courage, as you mentioned. Yet what is interesting about Esther is that her persona grows and develops. Initially, it seems as though Esther does not even know that she will have a role in saving her people. She's not a natural-born leader or a revolutionary. In fact, her instinct tells her to hide her identity and to maintain a stance of fear of revealing her authentic self. And then, when the Jews are put in danger, Mordechai appears to Esther. In Megillat Esther chapter 4, we are told of how Mordechai and the Jewish people learn about the evil decree that has befallen them and the danger into which they are placed. Mordechai sends word to Esther and asks her to intervene with the king on behalf of the Jewish people. Esther explains to Mordechai the danger of appearing before the king without being called, and he responds in chapter 4, verse 13, this way. Mordechai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows if this very moment is the reason that you have come to power. Because if you keep silent, he says to her, and who knows if this very moment is the reason that you have become royalty. Esther responds back to Mordechai, fine, go, assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan, and fast on my behalf. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law, and if I am to perish, I will perish. Mordechai's charge to Esther is this: Do not stand idly by and allow your people to suffer. Umi odea im la'it kazot higat l'malchut. For who knows if this very moment is the reason that you have become royalty? I was always puzzled by this, umi odea, and who knows. Isn't it blatantly obvious that Mordechai knows that this is the moment where Esther must act? Isn't he trying desperately to tell Esther to step up? Why does he phrase his direction this way? Rabbi Tamir Granot explains that Mordechai's message is phrased this way to Esther, specifically to say to her, I am asking you in a question form, because there is no objective answer. There is only a personal, subjective moment. Mi odea, who knows? You, Esther. You and only you. You know what must be done here. Inside of yourself, inside of your authentic expression of your vision, of your story, you know what to do next. In fact, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein states, the story of Esther is not merely of historical significance. This story serves as a model of process that every person must undergo in the course of maturation. Through the character of Esther, the Megillah gives us a real-life lesson in developing inner strength and in forming a mature personality out of the raw material of childishness. There is an intensely beautiful message here, and it is that each one of us holds a deep inner knowledge about what we can and must do to make the world better. Even as we feel that we are not natural leaders or the task is too much for us, Queen Esther's journey teaches us that there are moments in our lives where we will be called upon to look into our hearts and souls and step into our truth. But there are some additional leadership messages here as well. One, we don't have to do it alone. We need to find true chavrutot, true partners in our journeys. We need to find Mordechais who will not let us miss our Esther moments. Those who will call us out and say, hey, look around you and look inside you. Perhaps this is your time to step up. Two, we need communities of practice. Esther sends a message back to Mordechai. I need the Jewish people to act with me and to be my partners in this act that I am undertaking. They will fast on my behalf, and I will fast in parallel. Leaders need the people and need to bring the people along with them. Esther is ensuring that her story is felt by the people and shows them how their destiny is intertwined with hers. Three, we need a sense of urgency. The Malbim, a 19th century Polish commentary, focuses on the words, le'et kazot, this very moment. This is your moment, Esther. God is asking you to step up right now, not to wait until you are called to the king, but to take action to go to the king right this moment. The message, do not wait until the conditions are perfect, until we ourselves are perfect, but to step up into our own power, even in our imperfection. Tonight, we are truly blessed to hear the stories of women who heard the question, Umi odea, and who knows if this is your moment, and chose to step up and step into leadership, who chose to make their personal stories stories of communal and national growth. May we all be blessed to trust our own inner voices, to be true friends to each other, to form communities of practice, and to help each other step into our own Esther moments right now in order to benefit the Jewish people and the entire world. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me like this, or do I need to pick up the mic? Pick up. Oh. Can you hear me like this? Okay. Okay, I'm just making sure. Great. Welcome. I'm Eliza Mazur. I am the Chief Field Building Officer of Upstart, and Maddie gave us a beautiful introduction to Upstart's work from the podium, so I'm not going to say a lot more, but we'll be happy later as we go into mingling to share more about Upstart and our work. One of the things that we do in the world is we support incredible entrepreneurs, and 2 out of the 3 entrepreneurs on this panel this evening have been part of and touched by the Upstart Network, and we're delighted to have them be able to showcase their work along with Rachel Zaslow and also other entrepreneurs that will be part of our breakouts this evening. So I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce themselves, but I'm going to do one round of me introducing you so I can say all of your titles, because often as women, we don't list out all of our credentials, and I want you to hear not just how brilliantly inspired and talented these women are, but how incredibly well credentialed they are. So to my far right over there is Shira Berkovitz, who is both an attorney and a PhD in psychology. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Sacred Spaces. Alana Ruskay-Kidd, who is the founder and head of school of the Shefa School, and Rachel Zaslow, who is the founder, executive director of Mother Health International.
And a PhD, and want to know my credentials.
Yes. So we're going to start this evening actually with stories, because first of all, stories are wonderful to hear and a great way to learn about people and their work. So I'm going to ask each of you to briefly share the story of how you became inspired to do the work that you do in the world, and if you can weave in a little bit about Jewish values and how those maybe played a role in your path. And make sure, as you give your introduction, that you say at least a line about the organization that you've founded and the great work that it does in the world. And we will start with Shira.
Thanks, Eliza. Is this on? Yeah. I'm Shira. Better? Okay. I founded and direct an organization called Sacred Spaces, and we work on preventing and responding to abuses of power within Jewish institutions. We're working to create a systemic approach within an accreditation framework so that this is just like any other issue. It's not sensational, it's not controversial, the same way you'd have fire safety codes or you'd have a doctor you go to when you're sick, that this is a professional issue that can be dealt with calmly in advance and can help us do better as a community. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got into this. So I was getting a PhD in psychology and decided to go to law school. I thought I would do work in criminal justice reform, and I did for a little bit. But on the side, as grad students do, I was consulting for Jewish organizations on experiential education and youth-related topics. And I was asked at one point to give a speech at a convening. And they said, what do you want to talk about? And I thought about all the things I had spoken about in the past, and I thought, well, okay, I'm speaking to a group of youth educators, and I haven't spoken about this before. Let's talk about how to keep kids safe, how to prevent abuse. And there was immediate resistance and pushback to that suggestion. And people said, can't you pick something a little more upbeat? Nobody wants to talk about this. And I was really intrigued by that response. And so every year when I was asked to give a talk, they said, what do you want to talk about? And I said the same thing. And finally, they asked me to write about it. And so I started writing about this. And at some point, I sent it out to a group of experts in the field of child protection and said, can you give me feedback on this? And one by one, the responses started coming in. And they said, this is terrible. You don't know what you're talking about. Which was true. I didn't know what I was talking about. And then one response came in, one email by a man named Victor Veith, who's the director of the National Child Protection Training Center. And he wrote, you're off to a great start. I'm attaching some articles. Take a look, see if they might be helpful to you. And I did. And they were. And I did this deep dive into the footnotes. And before I knew it, I was reading more and more and more about this and writing more and more. And this little guide that was 12 pages long was quickly becoming a book. And I called up Victor and I said, can I come out and intern with you for the summer? And he said, sure. And I said, well, do you want to see my resume? Do you want to check my references? And he said, nope, I know everything I need to know. Come on out. And so I came out, and I moved in with this very devout Lutheran family. And my mom, who's over there, was totally nervous about it. And I think called up every Chabad rabbi out in Minnesota and said, how are you going to keep kosher? And so I got there, and the Vieths had devoted one entire fridge of their space at the shelf said, Shira's kosher food, do not touch, And at dinner that night, they said grace, and they said, Dear Lord, we thank you for bringing Shira to us safely to do this holy work. And I thought, wow, that's the first time anybody ever thanked Jesus for my existence before. And then it was my turn, so I said, Dear Hashem, thank you for bringing me to the Vieths and helping me do this work. And I shadowed Victor for that summer everywhere he went. And it wasn't at the office or at meetings that the magic happened, but at a breakfast table or in the car rides. And one morning we sat there and we pulled out this napkin and we started doodling on the napkin. And I said, Victor, what would it look like if we did what you're doing in the Christian community, what you're doing with the Olympics and the Boy Scouts of America? What would it look like if we brought this back to the Jewish community? And there at the breakfast table is where the Seeds for Sacred Spaces was born. And I came back, and around that time, the Rabbinical Council of America published, they passed a resolution based on an early draft of my guide, and at the very bottom of it, it said my name. And I started getting calls from everyone I knew and lots of people I didn't know, and all these organizations saying, wait, you know something about policy development in Jewish institutions and synagogues? What can you tell us? How can we do this? How do we keep our kids safe? And it became really clear that there was a very big need here, and one that I had only just begun to understand. And so very quickly, my law school studies became tailored towards this topic. I went to Thailand, to the Thai-Burma border to work on sex trafficking with AJWS. I completed 2 postdocs in psychology while I was in law school in alternatives to incarceration and childhood trauma so that I could know what I was talking about. And I moved in with an evangelical family, Billy Graham's grandson, and I just started looking at this issue. And then I came back to the Jewish community. And a few of us sat around a table and said, this is so much bigger than me and so much bigger than the consulting work I was doing. And it became really clear that we needed an organization, and that this wasn't just about children either, that this was about abuses of power at a very high level, and that we had to look at this systemically because we couldn't keep responding to this every time there was a newspaper article that came out exposing some scandal, and everybody would scramble in this very reactive way. And so we sat down and asked ourselves some questions. And that's how Sacred Spaces was born.
Hi. So I'm Ilana Reskay-Kidd, and I'm the founder and head of the Shefa School. The Shefa School is a pluralistic Jewish day school here in Manhattan for kids with language-based learning disabilities. We currently serve 110 students, and we have our first 8th grade. We go from 1st through 8th grade. And for me, I was working at the JCC in Manhattan. I was running their preschool. I was running their family life department, where we had lots of kids with special needs, both on purpose, because we really tried to communicate to families that we wanted to be a place that was inclusive, and because when a family would send their 2-year-old to school, all kinds of things would emerge in the time that they were at the JCC. And for me, it was some of the most meaningful work that I did was working with families, both in coming to understand who their children were, to create open spaces for them to have imagination, to see what they were both capable of and what kinds of supports they needed. And then there was the heartbreak of looking at kindergartens and seeing that here we were opening pathways into Jewish life and trying to celebrate children's differences. And that the options for kindergarten were very limited. And often families would come back to me in 2nd grade or 3rd grade or 4th grade. I think as a preschool director, you also become often like the parenting expert, the psychologist, the couples therapist, all kinds of other rabbi. And what I would hear was both the heartbreak of these children not being served, particularly in the Jewish day schools, and this sort of love story, this love song of when their kids were in the right place. And it was one of my many. I have a lot of rants, and one of my rants was, "Why don't we have one of these in the Jewish community?" And I was out actually for lunch with my then boss, Joy Levitt, and I was fetching, and I said, "Well, we should have one of these." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, if you really want to do this?" And I said, "I do." And she said, "Write me a proposal." And I was like, "Okay." So I handed her a proposal 3 days later that said, "Give me a couple of weeks over the summer to see if this is a good idea. I think this is a good idea, but." And I spent the month drinking a lot of coffee with a lot of people. And the more I spoke to people, the more it was clear to me that not only was this an idea that had been sitting for a long time. I always say that I don't get any points for creativity, only for execution. That this idea had been waiting for someone just to do it. And I came out with just a sense of urgency that it needed to get done. And I had no business getting into the business of doing this. I do not have a degree in special ed. I never raised $1. But what I knew that I had two things I did well. One was I knew how to get things done. And the other thing was I knew how to surround myself by really talented people. And that I knew that in the city of New York there was a great deal of expertise. And that if I could put the people around me who knew stuff, that we might have a chance here. And to stay out of the way, know what I know and know what I don't know. And that there was this huge body of research about what works, that in fact in the secular community there are some amazing special ed schools, and it became clear to me that we didn't have to innovate there. We didn't have to figure out a way to teach kids to read. We didn't have to figure out a way to structure classrooms where kids were going to be successful with the learning disabilities that we decided to serve. But what the innovation here was that the Jewish community needed to be there. And what I heard over and over when I spoke to families was that when they were in a secular school that didn't serve their child's needs, they left angry usually at the school, the principal, the psychologist, the teacher. But when people felt unwelcome or underserved in a Jewish day school, in a Jewish camp, in a Jewish preschool, they left angry at the Jewish people. And they left feeling that they had to keep re-experiencing the wound, because while you may never walk into that private school again and you might not write a check to them, that when the Jewish community wasn't there for you, you left feeling every time that you showed up at a Shabbat dinner table and your kids couldn't say the things that the siblings knew, that every time that you faced a bar mitzvah and you thought, well, my kid's not going to be able to have a bar mitzvah in that way, that every time that your family had a shiva and the other siblings' friends showed up, because that's what the Jewish community in those kind of communities knew how to do, and yours didn't, that each time they experienced that hurt again, and that it felt to me like we didn't have to be in that business, that we could actually do this. Shefa means abundance, and I named the school Shefa for two reasons. One was to say that these children have Shefa, they have abundance, they have tremendous blessings, and not to lose sight of that Shefa, that children are, that sort of notion of that we're made b'tselem Elohim, we're made in the image of God, and not to lose sight of children's blessings and gifts. And also it was a nod to the community that there was Shefa, that there was enough here. And it may not be true in every community in exactly the same way, but living where we live right here, that there was enough vision, there was enough resources, there were enough children, that we could figure out a way to get to creating this.
Hard to go after you powerful women. So I'm Rachel, and I'm a midwife. And so I'm a midwife, and I'm also a feminist theorist. My PhD is in feminist theory, and I became very interested in disparities in health outcomes. So why do some people die in childbirth and some babies not survive childbirth, and some people don't, right? So what are these gaps? And the gaps are often poverty related. They're often about inequality and bad access to health care. So I was questioning all of those things, and I took a job in 2007 in northern Uganda, 2006, 2007, working in a government-funded hospital during the height of the war that had been going on for 23 years in northern Uganda. And I worked in a hospital where women who were being systemically abducted and raped were coming to give birth, and often escaping abduction to come and give birth. And there were about between 20 and 30 births every single day at this hospital, and I was often the only midwife on staff. So I would go home at the end of a 14-hour shift, having delivered 20 babies that day, and I would only remember the emergencies. I wouldn't remember the births that were normal and the baby was okay and the mom was okay. And I would take a shower and I would cry almost every night, and then I would go back in and do it again. And I came back to New York after a year of doing that, and I had real PTSD. I had some trauma and was having panic attacks And I thought, I really can't go back. I know there's this immense suffering, and a lot of people are dying, these preventable deaths, but I can't go back because it was just too hard. And my father's a rabbi, and I was having these conversations with him saying, how can I turn my back when I've seen this happening? And at the same time, how can I put myself in danger and in harm's way? And so what is my responsibility, and how do I do this? And I started thinking a lot about this idea of, one, just, all of us in the image of God. That to me, my interpretation of each of us created in the image of God is really that we have a responsibility every day to wake up and do God. We have to create what God looks like every day. And that's different every day. Our best is different every day. But that we don't necessarily get to just walk away from suffering, but we can think about ways to create, to tikkun olam, to create the healing of the world that are creative, that don't harm us, that are for the good of all. So I went back to Uganda, and I pulled from all of the feminists that I know and all of the organizing that I've seen, which is kitchen table organizing. It means that we do our best as women sitting around with food, talking to one another. That's how we organize. That is how feminists have done what they do. That is how women of color feminists have done what they do. And we don't do anything without sitting around with food, and that local community knows best what is needed. We as Jewish women know how to solve the problems for Jewish women in our small micro communities. And I'm not going to walk into another community and say, I know how to solve your problems. But what I can do is sit in a community and listen and eat and offer food and be present, and then start hearing solutions. So I went and sat, and I gathered a group of 60 traditional midwives, and I sat for a year, almost day in, day out with those midwives, and listened and heard stories. And what I heard is that, most deaths, most perinatal deaths are preventable, but the things that keep people from getting prenatal care in the area where I work in northern Uganda, most people are subsistence-based farmers, meaning they eat what they grow. And if your farm or your crop fails, you don't have food for your children. So a woman's daily routine looks like getting up, working in the garden, and walking to get 10 miles sometimes to get water, and walking back. And so you wouldn't trade getting water for your children for prenatal care when things are pretty much okay, you think. But then when you start bleeding, you might try and get to prenatal care, but it's too late. So we created mobile midwifery units where we send midwives on motorcycles with sidecars into really rural areas, and we offer prenatal care for over 1 million women at this point in northern Uganda. Some are refugees from South Sudan, and some are internally displaced women from northern Uganda. And we have a birth center that 60 traditional midwives staff. They meet every single Saturday. They've met every single Saturday for 10 years now to build coalition. They eat together. They break bread together. And our clinic, the clinic that we have, sees about 10 births a day. And then we have a mobile midwifery unit right now in refugee camps for women from South Sudan. And there's about 100 births a day happening in those camps, and we're attending a lot of those births. So over 10 years at our clinic in northern Uganda, the infant mortality rate is 64 out of 1,000, but at our clinic, it's 11 out of 1,000. In New York City, it's 9 out of 1,000. So we've been able to, through comprehensive care, reduce infant mortality to closer to what it should be, just with hands-on, loving care. I can talk more about that later, but that's how we started, and that's our sort of seed.
Wonderful. Thank you all. This is really, really inspiring. So one could assume from having heard these openings that it was all easy breezy and worked really well and everything went just with the flow. But I'd love each of you to talk about a challenge that you faced in the work that you're trying to do, and particularly how you overcame or addressed that challenge. Anyone can start.
All right, I'll start. Okay. I would say there are sort of lots of challenges all the time. I would say for me, the first challenge, actually, I thought that what you said earlier resonated with me about the question of sort of the immensity of the problem and feeling kind of overwhelmed by, well, you can't solve it all, so maybe you shouldn't do any of it. And that, I would say, was certainly, so that manifested in the beginning with what population of students we worked with. And knowing that when you say, serving kids with special needs, that's like a vast universe. And knowing that there were going to be families that we were not going to be able to serve, and feeling like it was going to feel terrible. I mean, it does feel terrible when those things happen. And I used to carry I had lots of notebooks in the beginning where I was writing everything down as I was talking to people and trying to become an expert or surround myself by expertise. But was the sort of the Jewish teaching that it's not our obligation to finish the task, nor are we free to desist from beginning it and from doing it. And that for me, that I continue to have to remind myself of that every morning, in terms of just and we picked a particular population from looking, sort of doing a study of where the largest numbers were, and where there was really good research on what we could do that would be successful. But I would say that was the part that I think can often be immobilizing. And frankly, just even listening to these two amazing women, feeling like, well, that's much more important work. And why don't we do that also? And there's so much to do. And sort of how do you kind of say, okay, I'm going to do this piece, and my hope is we're going to do it really well, and we'll be able to do more as we grow and get successful, and that will inspire other people to do their good work and support them in other ways.
Yeah, that's true. I think when you think about how massive any problem is, it's easy to get paralyzed with fear. And I think, as our organization, I could talk about a million problems and challenges. But I think as we have grown, the question that people often ask me is, well, how are you scaling, and how are you going to build, and why can't there be a clinic like yours everywhere? And I have felt paralyzed and stuck by this notion of sustainability, that I don't want to be dependent on grant funding or outside funding forever on anything, right? I want us to be sustainable in a way that makes sense for a community before we move into other communities. And so, a few of our sort of answers to that, one has been just education, that if we can educate more midwives, then more midwives can go out and work in other areas. So we have begun a training program where we educate midwives from all over the world at our clinic, and then they can go out and help more people. And then the other thing is this notion that we started a few years ago of community ownership. So we have 3 people who go out into the community and ask members of the community to donate $1 each, and be co-owners of the clinic. And so we're up to $200,000 of our budget is in $1 donations, because we can say to people, if you can donate this $1, then your family, your auntie, your sister, your wife, your daughter will have free health care and have better chances of surviving her birth. So that $1 a person model, that community ownership and investment model, has been the solution to this larger and very looming problem of how do we sustain.
Sure. And I want to say that both of your challenges resonates with me very much. So I'd say that our work is difficult work. It's hard, it's complicated, and we've had to make a lot of difficult decisions along the way. So one example that comes to mind is that we were working for a long time to set up something for a large youth-serving organization. And we were going to go in and do training and policy development for them and help them put a system in place that would take care of the children in all of their constituent organizations. And the night before we were set to begin, the attorneys said that they had an issue with the contract. And that they were uncomfortable with various parts of it. And what were the parts they were uncomfortable with? They were uncomfortable with parts about reporting abuse to the police. And they were uncomfortable about who would get to see anything that we did. Would it be private? Would it be public? Would they end up being exposed? And they wanted us to make changes that were contrary to everything we stood for, and that would undermine the very safeguards we were working to put in place. And though I had experts who had flown out to begin the work, I pulled it the night before, and this was early on, and this was a big deal for us, and that was a hard decision. And then we kept talking and talking, and a year later, we met and we sat down as a group with all of the attorneys, and it was very intimidating, and we had a conversation, and we spoke about values, because I think that that's what this is about. This is about values, and this is about what does it mean to be a Jew. In Isaiah, God says to us, I don't need your sacrifices. I don't need your proclamations. I don't need the beating of your breasts. Just stop doing evil. Stand up for the victim, pursue justice and truth. And I really believe that if we can do that, if we can face the darkness among us, then we can stand tall and unashamed before God. And it turns out that this organization and all the other organizations we work with believe the same thing. They just get scared. And ultimately, what ended up happening was instead of us just doing the work with that one organization that wanted us to work with them, we ended up getting the contract. But not just that, they said at the end of the meeting, what would it look like if you did this work for all of our organizations? And so what started as something really scary with a little bit of faith and reminding ourselves, why do we do this? And we have to always do this from the right place, ended up protecting a lot more children than it could have if we had given in.
In a moment, we're going to turn to all of your questions. I want to ask you one more question before we open it up. If you could give one piece of advice to a social entrepreneur who's maybe a few steps behind you, what would you say is like one of your biggest lessons learned, or a piece of advice you would offer to a social entrepreneur heading out on their track?
I'd say ignore the noise. Keep your head down, look straight ahead, and don't get distracted. Because there are always going to be people out there who tell you that your idea is fantastic, but you're a little unrealistic. You're dreaming too big. There's another way to do this. Or somebody's threatened for whatever reason. Maybe they already inhabit that space, and instead of wanting to collaborate with you, they just want you to go away, and they don't want to rethink the issue. Whatever it's about, there are going to be a lot of people out there who have a lot of things to say, and it's good to listen, and then keep going.
I would say one of my deepest lessons has been to look for root causes. So you can always see a problem, and you can think there's often the most obvious solution is sort of a Band-Aid over that problem. But that the things that grow like seeds out of the ground and sprout into trees are when we look at what are those roots. So what is actually happening underneath the surface? And if you can identify the root problem of why people are dying in childbirth, or why people are leaving Judaism and not having good experiences at day school, or why there's abuse happening, if you can look at those roots and then find solutions that address that, then your tree will flourish.
I think for me, one of the things that I often hear when people are starting new things is the overwhelm of where to begin. And I think that part of the work of being an entrepreneur, which still seems like a thing business people do and not what educators do, but is you need to start to put some tent poles down. And you need to start to take certain assumptions that you assume are going to be right, because otherwise you're going to be paralyzed and the tent is going to go flapping in the wind. And you need to put down that tent pole with the understanding that you may lift it, that you may make a change later on as you continue to start to establish some of those other tents, those other poles, but that to kind of not feel too stuck that you can't ever take it back because you had made an assumption, and not to be too afraid to say, no, this is who we're going to serve, or no, we think we're going to be in Manhattan, or no, we think we're going to, I think that this is the model we're going to use for teaching reading, or you need to start to put some of those things in, because otherwise it's just an idea, and it's going to be very hard also to get other people around you. And so part of it is also that the more you can start to do some of that and can be able to communicate a vision, the more other people will join you in making that manifest.
We have time for some questions from the floor. So Stephanie's going to bring the mic around. And if anyone has questions for our panelists, they're open for questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All three of you used the word "we" very often. And I think at some point you probably, way back when you started, would have used the word "I" but felt uncomfortable using the word "I." So could you say something about how you made that? Who is the "we," if there is a "we"? And if not, if it's really "I," this, I think, maybe has something to do with what we're looking for, how you present your idea and yourself as somehow or other larger than just you. So, take out the just, you.
For me, all oppression is connected, and none of us are free until all of us are free. And at Mother Health International, the organization that I run, is a big we. There are 60 midwives. We have a full-time staff of 40 people in Uganda, 5 people in the US. We train midwives all over the place, and that's not just me. That's a lot of we. But I also see what I do as deeply interconnected to the we of people working to break down barriers all around. So I think there's like big capital we and uncapital we, right? There's lots of different levels of we.
I think I both felt very much a we of standing on the shoulders of all kinds of giants before me who had new stuff, and feeling very much my own sense of like, I'm going to learn from all of you, feeling that the we was very quickly feeling that there was a lot of support around me. And that to me, the more everyone felt that this was a communal project, I mean, I love your sort of the dollar, that notion. I think it really resonates with me. I needed more than $1 from a lot of people, although I'm sure you did too.
New York City, you need a lot more money for a lot of things.
But I think that sense of we and the people who help me in all kinds of ways, from I can give you some legal advice, I can help you make a logo in a business card, I can help open up my living room and invite my 10 friends to share ideas with, that sense that this was a communal birth has been both, I think, made me feel less alone, and is why it happened, was because of all of that sense that this is a communal project. And I bump into you all the time and say, I heard my friend helped start, and I'm like, yeah, your friend did help start. And lots of people helped start, and to me that's a good thing for everyone to have that sense of joint ownership.
I think your question is an uncomfortable one, isn't it? We are a we now. We get hundreds of calls. We're working on programs to serve thousands of organizations. And that's not me doing that. And that's a lot of people working together. And we're a staff of 1. And how is that possible? Because we're bringing on consultants in every area that we need to, we. And when I say we like that, I mean the board, I mean our advisors, I mean our volunteers, I mean who's officially on staff. It's such a silly, silly technical thing. But really, I'm kidding, we need to grow fast soon. But really, it's a lot of people. And yet, there's truth to your question, isn't there? And in the beginning, it was uncomfortable to say I. And I made a strategic decision to stop saying it because I couldn't possibly walk into some of these very major organizations that I was walking into and say, hi, I'm Shira. I'm going to help you fix this problem. It just doesn't work that way. Who are you? And so it very quickly became we. And then somewhere along the way, the we became true, right? Because it wasn't just me. There were so many people there who were standing right beside me, who were championing this cause, who eventually it became their cause. And now the we is true.
And along those lines, there are plenty of times when I'm alone doing work at 3 a.m, having a consultation or something, and it is very much I, right? But I think that the I that is not interconnected to a community is also then incapable of working in community.
Hi, I'm Jordana. So I want to know how your experiences have changed you. Like how have each of your experiences shaped who you are? And like, if you can compare, like, is there like a before and after that you're like, that was me then and this is me now? You know, I'm curious, you know, how this has shaped you.
I have a stronger belief in my own abilities. I think listening to you speak before, Alana, when you were saying that you didn't necessarily know what you were doing, but you just did it, that really resonates for me. This idea of everybody writing back to me and saying you don't know what you're doing, and they were right, and I still kept doing it. And then there was so much I learned along the way, right? And it turned out that my instinct was right a lot of the time, and that I gained tremendous amount of new skills. I learned a lot, and it turned out you don't have to know very much to have an idea, to follow a dream, and to make something happen. Sure, I had to develop expertise along the way, and I had to know what I was talking about. But the idea of seeing a problem and wanting to fix it, I think it's so crippling. And even now, sometimes I find myself going, that aspect of this, I can't possibly do this. And then I look around and I say, well, is anybody else doing it? And if the answer is no, then it really just doesn't matter. And you just jump in and you figure it out. And so I think maybe I always had that a part of me a little bit, but looking back now at this point and seeing how much we've accomplished and how much we've grown in just the last year or so gives me a new sense of confidence in my own abilities.
Well, my husband's here. You could ask him if he thinks the before and after. I would say I'm less afraid. I remember being at a moment, actually we were sitting together, and he said, well, what's the worst that's going to happen? And I paused, and I said, I think I'm just going to be embarrassed. Like that was really all it was, that I didn't think it was going to be the last job I was going to ever have, or that it just felt like fundamentally it sort of for me was like it's the fear that was the thing that was the scariest part, not actually that that there was any real, I mean there's risk, but it wasn't so risky actually. It feels so scary. But I think having taken that jump was powerful, and knowing that then I could take more jumps, and also had lots of experiences of sitting on 1-800 helplines to help try to figure out what insurance we needed or how I was going to figure out something or another. And I'd have to tell myself that I wasn't probably the stupidest person they had spoken to today on the phone. And then I needed to just ask the questions. And now, like, I spend much less time doing the things that I have no business doing. Now there actually are people who have done some of these things before, which is excellent, but that sense that, again, that feeling, okay, so you're going to have to just ask the questions and make some mistakes and pick yourself back up, has been a huge learning.
I would agree with both of those things, and I would also say that on a very deep level, I'm more humble. I think I set out with sort of these grand visions, and in fact, lots of grand things have happened. But I remember this moment when I was about 7 months pregnant in northern Uganda in a refugee camp, and I was so hungry, and all I had eaten for months was rice and beans, because that's all anybody else around me was eating. And I hit this point where I was so hungry. I mean, I was fantasizing about hamburgers, I was dreaming about them, and I couldn't imagine staying there another minute, and I just wanted to go away. And I realized in a really deep way that, like, my ability to actually go away put me in such a different place than all of the women that I lived with, and who would eat rice and beans every day for the rest of their lives, presumably, because that's what's to eat. And for me, that moment that I'm not any better or more entitled to a hamburger than my sister over here And that deep humility, and that, you know what, Rachel, you will survive being pregnant eating rice and beans. You will. And I did. And my daughter's fine. And she likes rice and beans, although I don't. But, you know, I mean, I think that is, that humility of, I'm not more entitled. I have privilege, extreme privilege. And I have a gift, which is to be able to use my privilege in ways that help heal the world. But I don't walk without understanding what that privilege means at all times.
I'm going to move us in just a moment into breakouts, but before that I want to give you each an opportunity to close. And for the closing, I want you to tell us two things. One is, what's the impact you want to achieve in the next 5 years? What does your work look like 5 years out? And what is one way that people can help you get involved, support the work you do? Anyone?
We're trying to train more midwives, not just in East Africa, but around the world, and we're trying to build more birth centers. We know that our model works, and so we're hoping to sort of plant more birth centers in other areas using our community-based ownership model. Ways to get involved on a very simple level is obviously to donate towards that cause. If you, in your communities, we give out to every single woman that delivers at our clinic cloth diapers and baby clothes, and that is like gold. So if you know mommy friends or women who have given birth recently and you can donate gently used cloth diapers or baby clothes or do a drive for that, all of those things go over in suitcases, 50 pounds at a time, and get given out to moms, and it is like the biggest gift to go home with a cloth diaper.
I would say for us, it's two things. One is our school is still growing. But I think that we also are very aware that we're interested in changing the conversation, and that every week there are schools and camps that are coming to us and synagogues and saying, what should we do? We're thinking about this. How can you help us? Do you want to partner with us? And I think for in the next 5 to 10 years, our question is, how can we really do that more to really help to support the work that's to take place in all of those different communities. And in terms of getting involved, my view is every place could be a more inclusive place. Whatever synagogue, whatever school, whatever camp, whatever workplace that you're involved in, there's ways for them to have more vision and more imagination. And every time you see a kid, to take the time to see and imagine what they're capable of and what's possible.
I'd say you could get involved 3 ways. The first is to educate yourself. Dialogue about the issues of abuses of power is becoming increasingly more common, and it's a part of everyday talk now. But speaking smartly about this issue, you have to know what you're talking about. You have to do a little bit of reading, and you have to be informed. And so I'd urge you to read up a little bit. In the pamphlets that have been given out, there's 2 articles that I wrote that you could access for free online. One is very concrete, 10 steps that you could put in place in your organizations that you're affiliated with. And the other is a discussion of the issues. What does it mean to have abuse of power, and what does it mean for an institution to cover it up? How does this happen to really good people? How do they find themselves on the wrong end of things, and how do you prevent that from happening? So those are some resources for you to look at. I'd say get involved in your community, so demand of the institutions that you're involved with. Say to them, ask them, what are your policies? How are you preventing abuse? What are you doing before anything has happened to make sure that it doesn't happen and to make sure that you respond appropriately if it does? And third, support our work. It's not 5 years ago, right? Today, people are talking about this. When we first started this, what we were writing in our grant applications to Natan, our first funder, who's in the room now, thank you, and to the Jewish Women's Foundation of New York, we were saying things like, nobody wants to touch this issue. This is taboo. Nobody wants to be the first domino. I don't think that's quite true anymore in the wake of Me Too, and yet there's still a lot of work to be done. We're getting hundreds, if not thousands, of institutions reaching out for help. They want to do this work, and clearly we can't do this with a staff of 1. So if this is something that you're excited about, join us, because we need partners.
I want to first big round of applause. Our evening is not over. We Extraordinary Entrepreneurs have 5 additional women entrepreneurs. And I'm going to ask each of you to just stand up as I say your name so everyone can see who's in the room. We have Elizabeth Mandel, who is the founder and executive director of J-Girls Magazine. We have Dick Bobiner, who is the founder and head of school at the Ideas School. We have Brooke Stern, who is the co-founder and the CEO of the Soul Foundation. And Miriam Kabakov, who is the co-founder and executive director of Eshel. And Kevin Sidoff, who is the co-founder and executive director of Lamplighter. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have an opportunity to have more intimate conversations at each table. There will be an entrepreneur at each table. There will be a note taker. There'll be an opportunity to kind of talk more about some of the themes that have bubbled up on this panel and some of our own questions about ways we can get involved and how we can support women entrepreneurs in our community. And then we will have a closing all together at 7:25. We'll finish by 7:30. So I want to invite everyone, stay right at your tables. There's either an entrepreneur sitting there or coming to you quickly, and we're going to continue the conversation.